Bergen sat on the steps of Gunir's keep. Resting his arms on his knees, he supported his hunched back and shoulders. In one hand he clutched the Sclavinian egg until his fingers were numb. In the other, he loosely held the neck of a bottle still full with mead. Sclavinian artifacts are notorious for curses. Rune's words echoed back as Bergen stared at the stone courtyard bathed in moonlight and blood. Swan's blood. He recalled Zabai's bronze body glistening in the sun of Rakadet, naked and pure and perfect and chained. For 2 years, he had thought of little else. Zabai. Swan's death brought everything from Rakadet flooding back. The bottle slipped from his fingers and struck the stone with a thud. Red mead flowed down the steps of Gunir. Bergen didn't move to stop it. He could still smell the death on her. And then their mother. Bergen sat up. Like he, Rune looked beaten down and broken beneath the grief that had penetrated the city. Everyone felt the effect of Swan's death. No one was immune to that loss. And Kallan's death? At least that one they could explain. "Did you find him?" Bergen asked. The sound of his own voice felt foreign to him. Rune shook his head as he watched a drop of mead cling to the lip of the bottle still resting on the steps. "Gareth is looking with Torun," Rune said. "They haven't seen him since." Rune dug his fingers into his eyes, and Bergen stared at the city, too grief-stricken to cry, too tired to sleep, too much death to live without hate. Hate. Bergen turned his thoughts to the fire that burned in his chest. That was something he knew and welcomed. He would need it where he was going. Bergen shoved his hand through his short black hair and rubbed the black from his eyes, and rubbed the back of his neck, then took up the bottle from the steps and shoved the egg into his pocket. "And what of Mother?" Bergen asked, rising to his feet. "Has her body—" Bergen lost the words in his throat. There was no room for grief, no more room to feel anything anymore but hate. Rune shook his head and wearily climbed each step to the great oak doors of the keep. "According to Geralt, Father's orders were to leave her." "We can't just leave her," Bergen said. The hate swelled again. "What will you have me do?" Rune said, turning back to his brother. "Swan is dead, Mother and Father's missing. After finding their kin slaughtered, the hundreds that lay dead." Rune rubbed his hand over his face. "The Dakafar will want answers. They won't stand for this, nor should they." Rune continued up the steps. "Why should I concern myself with their misery when it was their kin who started this?" Rune gazed down upon his brother. "When it was they who took our Swan from us?" Bergen asked. "Would you have war?" Rune said. "Would you see more dead? The Dakafar are strong. We have numbers." Bergen took a step closer. "They have a witch brother, a Sidkona." Bergen's face fell as he assessed the Dakafar's strength against their numbers. "One Sidkona doesn't make an army," Bergen said, and turned away. But Rune's hand flew to Bergen's arm. "They have weapons," Rune said, "forged from steel the likes I have never seen before. If there is war—" Rune shook his head and left the thought unfinished. "We can't win this." "There are others," Bergen said. The rising darkness within him blanketed his face as his thoughts turned to the mountains. "What others?" Rune asked. "Rune? Bergen?" Torun stood on the steps of the keep. Her dainty shoulders sagged from the insurmountable grief they all bore these past few days. Her long black hair, always so neatly twisted and fastened to the back of her head, was disheveled, making her appeal almost crazed. "Your father?" she said. Her lip quivered. "He's here." "I've never seen him like this," Torun whispered as Bergen and Rune entered the corridor behind her. "He came in mumbling such madness. It's like he's gone. I can't get him to talk to me. He won't speak to Geralt." "Where is he, Torun?" Rune asked as she run her hands together. Torun stopped before their mother's bower. The door was open just enough to make out the endless babble that accompanied the utterings of an old man. Rune pushed open the door and entered with Bergen following close behind. The candles were unlit. The hearth was cold. The Queen's bower was dark, save for the streak of bedroom light that spilled into the sitting room. The smell of death grew stronger as they drew closer to their mother's bedchamber. The inane ramblings became clearer until they approached the threshold where they could hear the words. "Please, forgive me. Kallan? Please, I didn't mean to. I didn't mean—" Rune pushed open the door. On the bed his mother lay, and on the floor by her side sat his father. Weeping, Strigve clutched his wife's cold hand. "Swan, sweet Swan," he muttered, smiling at Kallan's lifeless eyes. silver eyes, he said, so like yours. They glisten like pearls. Can you see them, Kallan? See them? His lips quivered and his face turned down with anger. Won't you look at me? Look at me? Please look at me, Kallan, please. It's because I killed them, isn't it, that you won't talk to me? Bergen stopped at the door beside Rune, and both brothers watched, unable to speak. I killed them, Tryggve said. He stroked her golden hair. I killed them all. Every child, every mother, every soldier. I killed them all. I had to. They killed our swan, our precious. Tryggve pursed his lips. Please talk to me, Kallan. Talk to me. Won't you speak to me? You're mad at me because I couldn't. Forgive me. You must forgive me. Please forgive. Rune turned without a word. Bergen turned without a word and stumped back through the sitting room to the corridor. Down the steps into the great hall he ran, not bothering a glance to the empty throne seated between the high seat pillars engraved with wolves. His hand struck the great oak doors, and Bergen ran down the steps past the stream of mead into the courtyard to the stables around the west tower. Bergen! Bergen paid his brother no mind. Bergen! Rune was already closing in on his heels, but Bergen kept running. Where are you going? To the mountains, brother! Rune stopped at the stable door as Bergen began saddling his horse. The Dvergar, Rune said. Bergen, you can't go. They'll kill you. Their enemy is my enemy, Bergen said. They will help us. They will kill you! Bergen stepped in so that he stood face to face with his brother. The soft sob at the stable door quelled the argument and drew their attention to Torun. A beam of moonlight flooded her reddened face enough that they could see the fresh wave of tears. He knew that shadow that clung so desperately behind her eyes. The king, she spoke between sobs. Your father, he... Shaking her head, Torun turned, hugging her arms. She wandered back to the keep alone. No! Bergen screamed and lunged right into Rune's fist. Bergen fell back, shook the initial shock off, and returned a punch to Rune's jaw. Before Rune could recover, Bergen slammed himself into Rune, who dropped his hands hard onto Bergen's shoulders and held him there. He isn't! Bergen growled, and Rune dropped his brow to his brother's. Not, father, not! Bergen's breath punched the air as his head spun, as if desperate to find something to cling to. Sabai! His chest throbbed with pain that twisted his insides. Swan? Rage burned his skin from the inside out. Mother, breathe, Bergen, Rune said. Now, father. No! Bergen shouted and shoved Rune back. I will go to the mountains! Bergen, they will kill you, Rune said. I have no choice! You always have a choice. Bergen shoved his hand through his hair again, and again, each time he saw Zabai, then Swan, then Kallan. Do I? Bergen gasped. What choice is there? To stand here and watch you die? Do you call that a choice? It's a risk I must take as king, Rune said. Bergen studied the silver-blue eyes, so like his. Apathy was taking his brother the king. Bergen knew the signs well. Rune, who spent his youth training for his day. His brother Rune, king of Gunir. Choice and risk were two things Rune would never have the luxury to exercise. I am not king, Bergen said. I don't have to risk. There is another way, Rune said. War isn't our only option, isn't it? Bergen said. And will you be here when the Dogfa find their dead and come to tear down our walls? Will you stand by idle and ready to negotiate? Will they carve open your back and tear out your ribs? Bergen shook his head. No, brother. I will not be one who stands and fights to die. You said yourself that their weapons are too great, and they have a Sidkona. The Dogfa will come, and we will defend ourselves, Rune said. They started this, Bergen shouted. When they took Swan's life from her, they took the very spirit from the city, just like Zabai. A familiar cold plunged itself through Bergen's rage as he realized what he had just said. Bergen, Rune said. Bergen's throat clamped shut, and he turned his attention to his hate in the saddle. Bergen, what happened in Rakadat? I'm going, Bergen grumbled. Bergen. Bergen raised his eyes to his brother and shook his head. I can't stay here. He pulled himself into the saddle and pulled back the reins, steering the horse from the stall. I'm going for help. Bergen, goodbye, brother. And snapping the reins, Bergen sent his horse cantering out of the stables. Bergen! Rune fell to the courtyard of stone. My sister, my mother, my father, my brother. His back hunched as a shadow crept in. He felt it like fingers twisting its darkness through him, cutting off his air. A cold chill, a dark pain remained in its rack, like a wraith. Rune gasped against the pang, insurmountable pain that made it hurt to breathe. His body shook as he battled back the shadow that threatened to take him. And why shouldn't it? He stared at the stone. He wanted to die, to rise up and kill, to avenge. The shadow. He watched it twist its ugly darkness into his mother in a matter of moments, until she succumbed to its plague, its vile filth. He watched it consume his father, who rose up and slaughtered the children, and now it took Bergen. Rune. Rune ignored the Geralf's quaking voice. Rune, this is how it will be. The shadow in me. Your Majesty. The title pulled Rune's attention back to Gunir. What is it, Geralf? No answer. Rune pulled himself up from his knees while wrestling back the shadow that had beaten him down to subservience. Geralf, what is it? Rune said and looked to Geralf. As white as his hair, Geralf stood sick with fear, his attention not on the west where Bergen had fled, or on the new king beside him, but the Dolkfar army that filled the horizon to the south. Eof. At the bottommost depths of Rune's being, a fire sparked to life, and he raised his eyes to the horizon. The shadow within swelled, urging him to fight, to avenge and to spill the blood of those who killed his sister. That was what the shadow wanted. Rune focused all his energy on the flame that churned his insides. The shadow did this. The shadow did all of this. Your Highness? Geralf asked. Rune looked at Geralf and raised his head with a command taught to him by his father. To war, Rune said, as the Dolkafar war horn sounded.